Good morning, everyone. Thank you very, very much for your valuable time this morning. My name is Brian Hay from Culture of Cybersecurity, and it's a privilege to share time with you and a privilege to share time with our wonderful guests this morning on this webinar as we explore the building of a mature cyber awareness program for organisations. I think it's an issue or a challenge many of us have at the moment, or aspire to be challenged by, because what the reality is, of course, we're all in different states of maturity as we sit here today. So if I could welcome our esteemed panellists, Belinda Hughes from Queensland Health, Laurie Joyce, also known as Gandalf the Grey from Victoria, the Australian Red Cross Lifeblood, and the esteemed Dr. James Carlopio. Thank you, folks, for giving up your time this morning. I'd like to also acknowledge DriveLock as one of our sponsors for this event, and we support them for their continued indulgence to spread the good word around cyber safety and cybersecurity around this wonderful country. The other thing I'd like to say, folks, is please make this interactive. These sessions work best when you throw your questions to us, so please don't use the chat function, but go in through Q&A, send us some questions, and we'll endeavour to answer them. If we don't get to answer all of your questions during the webinar, then we will absolutely answer them at the end of post-conclusion. So, folks, if I could throw it with a statement, as we tend to do, and let me start this way. The world is slowly awakening to the fact that up to 99% of all the cyber attacks launched actually target people in the first instance. That up to 95% of all data breaches that occur are actually attributed to human failure, not technology failure. So as those that are trying to address this issue endeavour upon their journey, what are the issues they should explore? What pitfalls should be avoided? And what fuel can be used to accelerate the pace of progression, if you like, the pace of that journey? Because sometimes it can be very slow, and it begs the question, could it be too slow? Laurie, you're a man that has experience in understanding accelerated journeys, and you had a unique start to yours. Do you mind sharing with us what that was?
No, I'm very happy to, Brian. Thanks for having me. I'll first start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. For me, that's the Bunurong people, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. And yes, we had a data breach at Lifeblood back in 2016 where a database of information collected on web forms on our website was inadvertently placed on a web-facing server rather than a server that was behind firewalls, and it was found by a guy who was scanning the internet for database files. Result of human error, huge impact on the organisation, potentially huge impact on the health of Australians, because if we lost the confidence and faith of the people that walk into our donor centres giving blood and blood products, then potentially that has the impact of people losing their lives at the other end where we deliver it to health organisations, hospitals, etc. So we had to ramp up very quickly. We were already on a journey of improving our cyber safety program and our tool set in order to respond to breaches, etc. But we had to ramp up quite significantly very quickly to make sure that we firstly contained that breach and then went on a journey to improve ourselves so that we hopefully don't have similar things occur in the future. And a big part of that has been what we've done in our cultural awareness program over the last 18 months, 2 years.
So did you have any cultural awareness program prior to the event taking place in 2016?
No, like many people, you tend to focus on the compliance side of things and say that, you know, you tick the box of everyone doing privacy awareness or security awareness or occupational health and safety awareness training on an annual basis. The problem with those types of programs is it becomes a bit of white noise for our people after a while. That they tend to be a little bit stale with them. That tends to be something that they have to do rather than something that's interesting to them and forgotten as soon as you press the submit button at the end of the survey or the questionnaire that you've got to complete at the end of it. So we did that, but there's lots of other things which we'll touch on as we go through this next session around some of the things that ought to be done to improve your outlook.
It's interesting because Australian Red Cross Lifeblood has always, from the get-go, been open, very open and transparent about what it experienced, and therefore sharing that story with the rest of the country, if indeed the rest of the world. I know you've shared your lessons internationally. How important is it for organisations to be transparent about these negative experiences?
Well, the consequences of not being transparent is you lose customers. I mean, you look at the experience of, I think it was Target in the US and other organisations where a data breach has resulted in a huge drop in share price, for example. They tend to bounce back over time. But for us, there was never any question of trying to hide it and not tell people what had happened. The impact on the individual potentially is enormous because, depending on the nature of the information taken, you can end up with your identity stolen and all the ramifications of that around dodgy home loans or all sorts of stuff that can happen as a result of that. So you also need to maintain the faith of your constituents. And in our case, it's the donors that come through the door are really important to us. So right from the very first minute we found out about it, there was always the intent to come clean and talk about it and tell people what had happened, why it had happened. The only caveat around that was we wanted to make sure we knew what had happened first before we went public with it. So it took us 48 hours to actually pull all that stuff together so that we could let people know. But there's never any maintaining that faith and getting people to continue to walk through the doors of our donor centres is key to us.
Yeah. Belinda, is it unfair to say perhaps you haven't had that rapid start to your program and it's been a little bit more measured, a little bit slower, a little bit more moderate?
Certainly our start has been quite different from Laurie's. The origin of us developing awareness and education for our health service really sat around an internal audit that was originally done from our team here in the health service. They audited a previous communication plan that had been implemented and discovered that there were no metrics, there were no measures, there was no assessment of how successful it was. So it was a combination of that and the risks on the register for the health service that really was the prompt and the originator of how we got started on ours. So certainly not the rapid uptake that Laurie had because there was no breach that had happened at the time to prompt the initiation. But certainly we've been on a different path, but quite a comprehensive one because it enabled us to create a plan, then align with our governance groups up through the organisation to have organisational approval so that it certainly has the support for what we're doing.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so both of you have started out on your journeys from different perspectives and with different focus, with different imperatives. So when someone is looking to build a mature program, how important is it to identify and set those goals right from the beginning?
Famous saying, any road will get you there if you don't know where you're going. So, you've got to have a plan, right? You've got to have the goals. If you look at the psych research, it's actually one of the most powerful and consistently effective psych interventions, especially in organizational psychology. It's goal setting. So yeah, you can have very different starting points and you can go quickly or slowly and you could have a catastrophic event or have an epiphany, but it really does pay in the long run to spend some time up front deciding where you want to go, and therefore you can have a better chance of getting on the appropriate road to get there. So
on that road, as you start on that journey, should you start out with awareness in mind or culture in mind?
Yeah, obviously, if anybody has heard some of the previous webinars that we've done this week, you'll know where this is an important topic for us. And I always say that awareness is a great place to start, but it's necessary and not sufficient for success. So yeah, you'd start with awareness, Brian, absolutely. It's the first thing you do so that people get that spark. But you can't just leave it there. You have to embed it in culture. You have to support it with all sorts of reward systems and recognition systems and cyber champion programs. If you think awareness is enough, please rethink it.
Well, okay, and it's not, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not just whether it's you've got an awareness program or a cultural awareness program, because there are different levels of awareness and there are different levels of culture. I mean, fundamentally, from a psych perspective, how many levels of, or different, if you like, channels of culture are there?
There's two main models that I like to use. It's either a 4-stage model or a 5-stage model. I'll talk to the 4-stage model now, and I think both Belinda and Laurie are familiar with this as well. We see organizations that start, they're just reacting. You know, they just, when something happens, they deal with it. Otherwise, they're not thinking or planning or doing anything. Next level of maturity up is when you do put some plans in place and you have this compliance mentality. So level 2, we talk about being compliant, where you're ticking the boxes and you're doing all the right things. Nothing wrong with that. But if you just stay there and you don't move on to level 3, which is the more proactive, continuous improvement and looking forward, you'll never get to level 4 or 5, depending upon which model we're using, which is, you know, teasing up into high performance. So that's how we tend to think about it.
Okay. Would you agree with that, Laurie? Sorry. Oh, we got you.
Got me?
Yep.
The first thing to point out is that, you know, for many organisations, our workforces are dispersed. So it's not one size fits all in terms of how you need to educate and inform people of what the threats are. You need to look at things within the context of what your important assets are, firstly, who has access to them, where they are. You need to understand the threats that may want to interfere or access those assets. And to James's point, I mean, you've got to, in terms of continuous improvement, you've got to look at those things all the time, because the threat environment changes. So therefore, your response to those threats needs to change as well. So setting the tick and forget box of having an online, 30-question bit of training annually is not necessarily sufficient to make sure that you do get that improvement over time.
All right. And Belinda, would you have any comment on that, or you want to challenge James and say, listen, fella, you don't know what you're talking about? Feel free.
Not so much, but what I would say is I think it's really important to start with an understanding of where you are culturally, so that you know where you're improving from. I think having a base measure for your culture within your organisation and having some different metrics that sit around that for when you're developing your plan, then you know where you're moving from. So I think that is also that's key to it, because otherwise you'll never know what the gap and what the difference is. But certainly I agree that it's a layered approach, and to be able to progress from one level of culture to another requires not just one operational tactic, but a number, different ways by different audience methods, different channels, and different approaches to be able to reach, as Laurie was referring to, different audiences within your organisation, because not everyone's sitting at a computer every day. They learn differently, they work differently. Our organisation's 24/7, so you can't reach everyone at the same time. So there's a lot of complexity in there that needs to be considered.
So to get a grip on that complexity and the myriad of change and diversity, how important is it to have a properly structured strategy and plan?
I think it's essential. So the planning that we do sits along understanding the current state assessment and where we are, getting a really good picture of that, and a combination of different methods to do that would be things like a diagnostic assessment of the organisation, as well as gathering our online data, looking at our existing metrics, so training metrics, compliance for that, and then putting a layered approach in place for greater training compliance, educational tools that we have available, sessions for people, a whole range of different activities. So manager toolkits, there's a whole lot of things. But leading up to more advanced cultures, you're looking at having cyber champions and reward and recognition so that you can progress through one to another to ultimately have a more evolved culture.
No, excellent. Thank you. I want to break some of that down as we go through later on this morning. You made mention of basically cultural diagnostics under baselining and benchmarking where the culture is. Why is that, James? Why is that cultural benchmark so important?
First, let me apologize. So one of my neighbors just started some machinery, so hopefully it's not too loud in the background.
Can't hear it.
All right, good. Look, it's essential. Belinda just hit the nail on the head. You know, if you don't know where you're starting from, it's another version of that. Any road will get you there. If you don't know where you're going, you don't know where you're starting from. You don't know which road to take to get to where you're going. And we have arguments all the time about, you know, even if we all agree on that end goal, we have disagreement about how to get there because we have different perceptions of where we are right now. And one group might say, oh, we're totally over this. You know, we're all over it. We understand completely. And so why are you doing all this basic crap with us? And another group, you know, doesn't understand the most basics. And so the other really valuable thing about the diagnostic is you find out so much more than what you think you're going to find out when you do a really good diagnostic. Again, being an organizational psychologist, it's my bread and butter. I believe in it. It's like, would you go to the doctor and not spend the first 10 or 15 minutes talking to her or him about what your symptoms are and what your problems are and how you're feeling? It's insane to think about that. You've got to do that diagnostic before you do anything else.
Sometimes people say, well, can't I just do a survey, 7-minute survey instead of a diagnostic? Sure,
go ahead. Waste your money.
I think the comment about wasting money is key as well, because it's a limited bucket. We all have to justify our return on investment. And if you don't baseline it initially, then how do you know what you're spending is being effective? Yeah. And then how do you adjust it if it's not? You know, what other things do you put in place to make sure that you do improve?
And that makes a really good point. It comes back to which I don't hear discussed enough in the entire whole spectrum of cybersecurity is what is the return on investment? Where is the assurance that you're actually mitigating risk? And that comes back to, does it not to measurability to then find it? So if on that measurability aspect, in your experience would be some other metrics that people should look for when building out their program?
Yeah, it's something we all struggle with, security metrics, because it's easy to make the claim that we've prevented 100 breaches this year because of all the stuff we put in place, but how do you actually quantify that? Because it only takes one bad experience, and it might just be human error, mistake, that causes it to totally derail you. So when we go back to that cultural baseline, that it is a key. If you can understand how the different cohorts within your organisation react to things, or whether they're able to pick up things like phishing emails or any of the other things that we tend to test for these days, that's a starting point. It's not the be all and end all, but at least it gives you something to measure and show success in what you're rolling out.
You just made a really interesting point. Not that the other things you said were not interesting before that.
It's the Gandalf in me.
But it's about understanding that and accepting. And Belinda, to your point, you've got this complexity and diversity within a work environment, and you've got different business units, and as a consequence, you get cultures, you've got subcultures, and subcultures, depending on where it is. And there could be, how do we get the measurements for those subcultures, perhaps, if you like, and sometimes there's a mistake that we just want to homogenize all that data that could be achieved and give it a one number sticker for the entire organization, which makes it easy sometimes. But as you go and address those complexities, you must not address them on those specific levels. If you've got Belinda, if you had a cohort or a unit involving a certain medical practice operation, and would you address the whole hospital, or you would focus the issues that were identified in that location? So when you look at your measurements, are you sort of trying to dig down as much as you can?
Absolutely, Brian. I think that there are multiple different ways to measure. It's not a one size fits all. Certainly, you can look at completion rates of training, but you need to look at other methods for, say, education packages. So if you were rolling out, for example, a manager's toolkit, you need to ensure that you're reaching all of the people that you need to with the information. And then it's about, some metrics to determine whether that information is then being cascaded down to staff. So that needs to be measured. Certainly attendance rates can be measured. So there's, quantitative and qualitative data that you need to pull from it. Phishing simulations and how many people are participating in that, and what the hit rates and reporting rates are. So it's complex, and there's multiple layers and many different approaches, because it's not a one size fits all. There might be a strategy that we need to ensure clinicians are aware of their obligations around information security reporting or access to information, because it's compliance nationally. So we need to ensure that they have a certain package that's relevant to them, that may not be a one size fits all for all staff across a health service. So that has to be built into it as well.
And basically, is when you build your system, are you saying that you should evolve your metrics with that program of work so you can make it tailor-made or bespoke to your organisation to get that best strategic fit?
I think that it's there's two aspects to it. I think it is good to have some metrics that we can revisit. So ideally, if you're doing a cultural diagnostic assessment at the beginning of your campaign, then it would be ideal to progressively revisit that later on to see if there's a move in culture. And I think compliance rates for, say, training, that's another easy one, because you can be tracking that. But there are certain packages that might be a bit more bespoke, and that will be a separate metric again. That might be a campaign that's run out just for a period of time. So you might be assessing the success of that based on that particular campaign.
It's really interesting when you go in and do a cultural diagnostic and you have that opportunity, James, to spend at least a minimum of an hour with someone, and you evolve, let's just say, hopefully a position of more trust. What is interesting is that sometimes you become aware of these normative behaviours, and those people don't see anything wrong with those normative behaviours. It is perfectly fine. We make the entire operation far more efficient because one person logs in at the beginning of the shift and we all use their login credentials, because we don't have to log out, we don't have to say for someone to log in. Or it may be, oh, look, I put these files, I'm so dedicated, I'll put these files on my USB and I go home and work on them at night because I care about what I do. And these things are done with the best intentions in mind, but of course, they come with some challenges, right? It's not appropriate. And is this what you alluded before? Don't waste your time with surveys, James? Because with the survey, you are not going to find out those little pearls of insights, correct?
Exactly, because people do what makes sense to them.
Yeah.
And, people don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'm going to make the organization more vulnerable today. I mean, people really don't wake up in the morning to try and make our lives more miserable. It seems like that, but they don't. They do what makes sense to them. So you're right, that simple tick the box survey doesn't get into the depth. And that's why when we do cultural diagnostics, it's all based on interviews, and because you've got to develop the rapport and you've got to ask so many different questions and ask around things, and to get people don't know what they don't know, right? And that's why it's so important to really dig in and get a good investment in that good baseline.
Right. So, Laurie, you had a situation where you had this chaotic event that the business responded, and everyone understood why they needed to respond to it. And Belinda, you haven't had, dare I say, fortunately, the advantage of that massive kickstart. But how much is it a challenge for you, do you think, and your experience to date and in the future, to actually excite the business over what you're trying to achieve on your journey?
I think we've had the benefit that the organisation recognises the need for greater awareness and education around cybersecurity. So we've been able to gain momentum via our working group that we have within the health service. It reports up to governance groups and then ultimately up to the board. And the board is very interested in what's happening in this space. They recognise the associated risks with it. So I think that has been helpful. It's just a different position to the one that Laurie's in, where he's had the data breach, and therefore additional resources have been thrown in that area to be able to resource it better. So that's really, it's difficult to say whether, we've had the slower uptake, but we certainly have a lot of interest in the health service in this body of work. We've just had the cybersecurity training become mandatory across Queensland Health. That will help with compliance, and it will just continue to build and gain momentum as we go.
How much of a problem or attitude have you, anyone can answer this, in your respective organisations has been, hang on a sec, that's cybersecurity, that's not our responsibility?
I was actually just going to touch on that. You go ahead, Melinda. Yeah.
I think it's quite fascinating. I think belief quite clearly is that it's technical and that they're technology breaches. I don't think there's a significant recognition that it's actually the individual being targeted, and that we really need to be focusing our attention on improving their awareness and sense of responsibility and what they need to do, and everything around that, rather than thinking that it's the organisation that's actually the target.
Sorry, Laurie.
Yeah, I was just going to say that a fundamental is that security is everyone's business, just like privacy is. So you need to drive that. One of the ways of doing that is focusing your awareness training and what you roll out on having people realise what it means to them personally, particularly now with a lot of far more working from home than what there used to be. Understanding that when they're targeted at home, they're the sorts of things that they should be looking out for, whether it's identity theft or targeting their children for bullying or kiddie porn or whatever it happens to be. So making them aware of the fact that if they practice good hygiene at home, that those good habits are going to follow them through into the workplace anyway. So we've done a bit of a flip over the last 18 months to 2 years around having people understand that that stuff doesn't just happen in the workplace. It happens at home as well, and we're in a more relaxed environment. Sitting in my home office here, for example, it's sometimes easier to get caught up in the bad stuff than thinking that you got all the protection of whatever work puts in place around you. So that it's key. And the other thing we need to understand is that whilst a broad program, there's lots of common elements that you need to make everyone aware of. There's also particularly targeted stuff within the organisation that people might be subjected to. For example, you put in place different strategies for your payroll team and your people and cultural team than you necessarily would to ICT team or people on the front line in the hospitals or in the data centres, wherever it happens to be.
I'd like to come back to that issue as we go forward in our conversation this morning. But whilst we're on this report, just on this touch point about remote, I've just come across recently an interview with the ransomware criminal. Obviously, it was all cloak and dagger stuff. And this entity was opening up about how they, target, how much money they make, how they've changed their methods of operation and the like. And the question was asked, and I just brought it up here, I just happen to have it on the desktop. How have you been impacted? So this is a question to the ransomware specialist. How have you been impacted by the global COVID-19 pandemic? Has shifting to remote work changed your strategy? Answer: certainly, in a positive way. Many employees began to work remotely from personal computers, which are easier to infect with a virus and steal credentials to access the company. But again, if we've got a mindset where people are only focused, oh, hang on, it's work stuff, they'll give it to me, it's not my responsibility. And to your next point, Laurie, about specialisation and the specialist groups, question, during the attack, do you use any OSINT, as in open source intelligence tools and technologies? Answer, all available methods are used, obviously, to profile who's who in the zoo, what areas they work in, what's their specialist realm, how can I target them? Obviously, then it goes to, are they working from home? Is it a BYOD environment, or do they have the work computers? And you can see from a crook's eyes, as you would well know, Laurie, not that you're a crook, but I've had it on good authority, used to chase them, was that they're going to pick the easiest mark. And so when you're building out a program, if you understand those more high-risk entities, James, Belinda, or even Laurie, does that mean you should prioritise those high-risk groups in your planning?
I think it's essential that we need to tap into those high-risk groups. So whether it's, be it business email compromise, our finance officers, whichever area it may be, I think that it's essential that we ensure that they have the education and support that they need, the understanding of what that means, that they can be the individual target that may be out of the work environment, and that they can actually be targeted by people internationally. And we've seen it happen. I mean, we've seen other cases where other organisations, and some close to home, where they've been targeted. So I don't think it's off the table anymore.
I'll just finish with one more quote from this interview. Thank you, Belinda. And they asked this scumbag crook, what advice can you give companies to avoid being targeted by Lockbit, because that's the ransomware gang this person is from? Conduct proactive conversations with company employees to counter social engineering. That's their advice. So what people don't understand, they perceive ransomware as being, because it's encrypted, as a purely technical play, but to get in to the organisation nearly every time is through the human. So, and again, how important it is to be up to date and cognizant of the latest threats and methodologies utilised by criminals to prepare and develop your program of work.
Oh, it's really important. You need to understand the threat environment. I got phished recently, which I was very embarrassed about. It was an internal campaign, LinkedIn invitation. My work email is not linked to my LinkedIn account. My private email is. So this came through the work account. It was allegedly from someone in the same industry who worked overseas. And I looked at it and thought, yeah, she looks like a nice thing, and a potential work colleague. I clicked on the link and fell for the phishing campaign. So I've confessed to that. There was an article on me clicking on the link in the intranet, because even though I'm well aware of what to look for, I still got fooled by this. And I got fooled because I was distracted at the time it came in. I went back and just clicked on it. So you do need to be aware of it. You need to be up to date with what's going on, and you need to continually tell people about it. And one of the reasons I was happy to be interviewed internally and have that out is that if people understand, even someone who's supposed to be fully aware of what can happen is fooled at times. It's worth just taking the time to hover over the links and look at where it's coming from and do all that other sort of stuff we tell people to do all the time.
Well, mistakes happen, and that's I like using the analogy of the motor car. Can you guarantee me you're not going to have an accident when you go out? Of course, your intention is not to next time you drive a car, but you'll never guarantee it, because there are so many things that can happen, sometimes within your control, very often outside your control. You can be distracted, or so many things, and it used to upset me greatly when I'd hear, especially in the media, comments that victims of frauds and scams were stupid or greedy, and how stupid could they be? And when the reality is, social engineering has nothing to do with intelligence, and every single one of us, if approached with the right pitch at the right point in time, when we might be distracted or eye off the ball, we could all fall victim for these things. And it sometimes saddens me that there are people inside all of our communities that have no empathy for victims of crime because they think, oh, you should have known better. Well, that's not what it's about at all. And does that, folks, reflect a lack of understanding and a degree of ignorance on a large part of the population that just don't understand what this is about, James?
Absolutely. It's hard to understand until it happens to you. It really is impossible to understand until it happens to you. It's a great psychological construct. It's called projection. And a lot of psychological theory is based upon the fact that you cannot, as a human, see anything outside of yourself unless it's already inside yourself. Right? If you don't have the scaffolding inside, you can't see it outside. So if it's never happened to you, you don't have a clue. And if you heard our webinar from a couple of weeks ago, you'll know I very briefly told the story when we were talking to the victim about how I was victimized as a youngster and scammed out of a couple of $100 when I thought I was getting a good deal on a stereo. And I have great appreciation now of how easy it is, as Laurie does, and other, because until that happened, I would have thought same thing. I mean, only idiots get caught. No, anybody can get caught, and we regularly do.
Oh, thank you for sharing. Belinda, when you were pulling your program together, what are some of the elements that you felt that you had to be considered as you were putting that, constructing that program and scope of work?
Certainly to have an end goal in mind. So we needed to understand what the key issues were for us and what the key risks were, so that we could develop a plan that was appropriate to address those. Certainly it needed to be clear who the target audience was, and also how we were going to reach them. And then there's a layered approach to be able to achieve that. There are metrics that sit with every different tactic that's attached to it, because if you can't measure it, then you really don't know if it's successful. And the metrics are different depending on what it is. But certainly, fundamentally, we needed to know, what's our starting point, because if we're going to significantly put in a lot of effort, then we need to know where we're starting from. As we go on, it's layered with more. I wouldn't say complexity, but it's probably different levels of awareness and engagement, cyber champions, reward and recognition activities, those sorts of things, so that you can start to really gain some momentum and have some impact across the health service because we're such a large organisation. So I guess it's that layered approach. It's not just compliance focused. We have the measures to track. We're creating dashboards. We've got training compliance. We've got toolkits, awareness sessions, a whole range of activities. And it won't be static. It will change and evolve as we go on, because it's not meant to be something that's just for a set period of time. We might reflect on it, update it and change it. But I can see that this is a plan that will just continue to go into the future.
So is it important to celebrate the journey as you progress along the way?
Oh, I think, yeah, absolutely. I think it's also important to raise awareness of the activities and their progress along the way as well, so that there's continual information out there, and we can start to reflect on what those activities are. So as we progress through something, we'll report on it, and then that's the part that can be quite enlightening. Is we'll recognise that there's behaviours out there that we didn't even know existed before we started, and I think that's really powerful, because that just again helps to build that momentum.
Thank you, Laurie. I mean, you had a different start with a chaotic or catastrophic event occurring. Is it important, or is it necessary to remind people as you proceed with the journey, just hang on, let's not forget why we're here and why this is important?
Yeah, it is. It's one of the reasons I regularly give my my talk about the breach to new people that come into the organisation, because they don't have the organisational memory of those events. So I think another key is to take it out of the hands of security, because it's easy just to say it's a security issue and then pass it back. So a multidisciplinary team is really important. Security should have an input, obviously.
Thank you for ruining my stream of questions that I had, Laurie. Okay, so that's a great point, and I just want to explore that bit. So let's just go back. If I said to you, and I'm not talking, this is your opinion, not the opinion of your organisation. But if I said to you personally, do you think the CISO should report to the CIO? What would your response be?
No. I mean, security should have a direct input to the executive level, but it should be something separate from the information communications technology division.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because we're not just talking about cybersecurity here. There's other layers that are really important: personnel security, physical security, the governance layer. So you keep handing it back to technology to look after, then you've got gaps, and you won't address those gaps if you don't have that voice at the table.
Right. So now you're suggesting that perhaps cyber awareness shouldn't sit under the CISO.
Correct.
And you did that at Australian Red Cross Lifeblood by, did you say, forming multidisciplinary teams? Who made up that team, and how does it work?
Having said, I've said what's ideal. I haven't said exactly
what's
necessarily
ideal?
what we've done.
Okay, well, let's go with ideal. Let's go with ideal, based on your experience.
I guess at the governance layer, we have members of the organisation from the various divisions at that governance layer. So we have a cybersecurity advisory committee, which is not just ICT division. It's chaired by the CIO, but there is input from the other divisions into that. We have an enterprise data governance advisory committee as well, which also has input from other parts of the organisation. So in an ideal world, I don't believe it should be left in the hands of the CIO or the technology division. And there's a lot to be said for that being run out of people and culture, as other parts of that cultural side of the organisation are run as well. But it needs to be a multidisciplinary team. Now, in our cyber cultural team, there are members from learning and development, there's members from communications, there's ICT members, and there's other people within that team that's actually doing the stuff as well.
What about workplace health and safety? Do you see it becoming assimilated with workplace health and safety?
Potentially, it's a subset of that overall. So we're not heading down that path ourselves at the moment, but potentially that's a good place for it to sit.
So I remember writing an article, I have mentioned this previously, that I can envisage that cyber safety will one day become part of workplace health and safety, because I can see, and I'm sure I know instances where it's happened, where the children of employees have been targeted in order to get to the employee, in order to get to the network. And I can only see that becoming more exacerbated through remote working. Here we have straight, from the horse's mouth that great, this is an opportunity for us. We can target people at home or on their own devices more easily. Did you challenge that it could end up in the same legislative and compliance realm as physical workplace health and safety?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, there's a heap of other stuff going on in the whole cyberspace now around legislative requirements and mandatory reporting and all that other stuff that hangs off there too, which will have an impact on the the way we educate people and what we've got to roll out. There's a question there, and
yeah, for you, Laurie, what are the biggest hurdles you have encountered with embedding cyber awareness at Lifeblood?
I think the challenge is getting to everyone, because not everyone's in front of a computer. So when you're trying to roll out training that's just computer based, it's difficult. So and there's also competing priorities as well, obviously. So finding that time in a person's day to actually log in and listen to something that goes for half an hour, or read something that might take them 20 minutes is difficult. So short, sharp stuff is one of the things we've been trying to concentrate on. And when I say that, we've asked people to come forward who have had been the victims of scams, or who've had family members that have been victims of scams, and the view there is that if you can talk anecdotally about things that have really happened to you as a person, like I did before, about being phished, those are the lessons that tend to stick more than the dry stuff around you've got to do this because the policy says you've got to do it. So,
James, how powerful is storytelling?
As long as there have been people, we've been telling each other stories around the campfire, or as we were roasting the buffalo, or the mammoth. So yeah, it is one of our most inbuilt and still till today powerful. We talk about storytelling in organizations to spread culture, and yeah, so we talked about it earlier, right? You got to share your story, Laurie. That's what you did, right? I made a mistake, got it, and share that story and learn from it. And everybody can make a mistake. I only get angry when people make the same mistake twice.
Yeah, and I think I know when we've gone in and done these culture diagnostics that I'll give one example. The organisation, 70% of the people interviewed had experienced a negative cyber event, but only 50%, only half of those of that 70%, actually told their colleagues or their friends and family about that experience. And I think, that's a cultural issue we have to change and encourage. Let's be open and transparent with this. Belinda, the question is, what do you consider the biggest hurdles are in implementing such a huge cyber awareness campaign across government? Well, not all government, just your behemoth of health government.
Yeah. Probably my comments would be similar to Laurie's, where you've got such a large workforce that is working, 24/7. They're not all doing the same role. Some are clinical, some are a whole range of different activities that people are doing. So our ability to reach them is significantly challenging, because not everyone receives email, not everyone receives the standard communication formats that are sent out across our health service. So that's a significant challenge in itself. It's probably our biggest one at this point. Then it's the uptake of it, the uptake of activities, and trying to enact change for such a large organisation is also significant. So, trying to get that momentum will be key as well. So that will also be a challenge. We've just introduced mandatory cybersecurity training. That's an interesting one. So that previously hasn't been the case for us. And that will certainly help us on the journey. It's not the be all and end all, because, just because we have cybersecurity training doesn't mean that that's going to be a behaviour change for people, but it certainly is an awareness tool, and it will help perhaps towards, heading us in the direction of compliance. So, it's going to be a whole combination of things for having such a large organisation and progressing it forward, being able to reach everyone.
Great, thank you. James, as an expert in the area of education, how do you build an effective program for a cohort of people that we've acknowledged all learn differently?
Mm-hmm. No, I was just thinking about that in the case, as we're just hearing from Belinda and Laurie. Look, one of the things I've loved so far, let me answer the question this way. I've lost count of how many times I heard Laurie and Belinda say there's no one-size-fits-all solution. I am so happy to hear that, because I argue all the time to make that point, because we've got so many people who are thinking, with blinkers and blinders. So to answer your question, Brian, it's it's got to be multifaceted, it's got to be multi-layered, it's got to hit people from multiple sides. And we are so lazy in the positive sense of the word. You know, we try and do what's quick and easy and get the 80% with the 20% of effort. It's just not good enough. You've got to put in massive time and effort and have storytelling and have things for people to read and have coffee and tea sessions and have online things and just do it again and change it and keep it alive and lively, as Laurie said. So it's a lot, and it's a lot more than I think most people are willing and able right now to put into it. And unfortunately, until it happens to us, it's not going to be personal enough, relevant enough, and important enough for many of us to actually put our money where our mouth is.
Folks, do we think that a compliant organisation is a mature organisation?
No.
Why is that?
Because I think that, just because we're compliant and ticking a box to say that training has been completed does not mean that we have changed behaviour for our staff. I think that it's a base level step on the journey. It's just, it's fundamental and important, but it's not the be all and end all. There's certainly many more things that are required than just compliance.
You have a view, Laurie?
Yeah, I think many of us work in regulated industries, so that compliance aspect is important because you need to demonstrate that you're working towards a particular type of standard. But I agree with Linda. It doesn't necessarily mean it's like ISO 27001 certification. Okay, so you've got policies and procedures and things in place. It says nothing at all around the effectiveness of the controls you put in place to ensure that those things actually work. Yeah. So that's the important part of it. Ticking box exercises are okay to demonstrate compliance, but they don't tell you anything about how effective the programs are.
Well, it's interesting. If you actually follow the compliance, I think you're doing a good job. And I'm not dismissing or poo-hooing people that work very hard to achieve that. But just think about it for a moment. A compliance is normally a response to a regulatory framework, okay?
Yep.
A legislative requirement. Generally, I've been in the public sector a very long time. It can take between 3 to 5 years for that issue to become enshrined in law that requires a compliance framework to be reflected, correct? That means they've waited. The politicians have finally decided, yep, we're making the law around this because the situation is so bad, and they got onto the bill. It went through 3 readings of Parliament, blah, blah, blah. There's 3 to 5 years. So that means we're responding to an issue that potentially is 5 years old, and the crooks are operating here and now. You see what my point I'm making? How far behind are we with a compliance mentality? Potentially we're half a decade behind the crooks. But I'm still not poo-hooing. I think we need, and that's where, I've heard the question, is compliance the floor or the ceiling? And for too many organisations, it's the ceiling where it is, and it must be, the floor. So I think it's... I know I've spoken to people, so I'm not going to, labour the point that this compliance ticking the box really doesn't improve your cyber safety. And I think, Laurie, I think your example with 27001 sums that up very well. When we're pushing change programs through an organisation, we don't have much time left, because I see, pushing a mature culture piece through is a significant change program. Why is it, James, we're afraid of failing, or we lack the courage to experiment enough inside an organisation with our people?
Related to the point we were just talking about, where people are always looking for the right answer, and they think that there is a right answer, and therefore, they're going to get blamed or yelled at or miss their KPIs or whatever. And we've got to shift that mentality, Brian, is where it's okay to experiment and try and play, because that's what the criminals are doing, right? They're trying anything and everything. And
I think you've got to be happy to fail.
Yeah.
It's like purchasing a new bit of technology and throwing a heap of effort into getting that set up and then finding it doesn't work properly. You've got to be okay to say, well, it hasn't worked, we'll walk away from it. The lessons we learned from this will lead to an improvement in choosing something differently down the track. So it's important to understand that it is okay to fail. People fail all the time. As long as you learn from the failures, then you're on the journey
forward,
of improvement.
right?
Yeah.
Failing forward. Great book.
We think cyber safety should be part of personal performance appraisals or KPIs.
Well, for us, essentially it is now, because making it mandated training that's part compliance with that in their PDPs is part of it. So to some degree, that's a base measure in everyone's PDP now.
Okay. Laurie?
I'm not sure on that aspect. I think fundamentally, when you're talking about this stuff, the old golden rule applies. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So I want my personal information protected by the organisations I share it with. Therefore, I should have that same attitude to the stuff that I've got privileged access to within the organisation. So, and again, if we're going to encourage people to agree that it's all right to fail, then are they going to put their hand up when they do something wrong? Not so sure.
Yeah, maybe that's a reflection of the culture that exists, and is that another indicator? We go back to the measurement and the metrics we had before. Folks, we've got only a couple of minutes left. I just wanted to invite you to, if there was one piece of advice you would give to someone working on a cyber awareness program and trying to get that model best fit and the most mature possible, what would that piece of advice be, Belinda?
For me, it would be to find out the way that employees communicate and try and target those existing channels. And they may not be the traditional corporate formats. It might be team meetings. It could be some kind of communication process between managers and staff. Because unless you tap into those existing channels that staff are using, then you're never going to be able to reach them with the messaging.
Thank you. Laurie?
I think it's understand that it's not set and forget, that you need to refresh and you need to look at new ways, and at this point, using different channels is really important. Everyone's used to communicating on social media these days, so maybe you set up an internal one. We've got a Yammer group for our cyber awareness stuff there, which allows you to tap into a broader community anyway. But change what you do all the time, because the threat, the crooks are changing.
Great. James?
Yeah, I'd like to wrap up what Belinda and Laurie are saying by saying, once again, there is no one size fits all. Stop thinking about it in terms of what's right and what's wrong, and try a whole bunch of different things, and leave you with the psychological acronym of PRI, Brian, that you and I talk about all the time. Make all of this personal to people so it becomes relevant to their world at home and at work. And then all of a sudden, magically, it's going to be important to them. And then you've got them hooked.
Right. Folks, thank you very much for your time. It's been absolutely stellar. Really do appreciate you sharing your insights, your wisdoms, your learning, your experience, because we're storytelling, and fundamentally that's what, so much can be elicited from that. So I thank you for your storytelling this morning. Delegates, we thank you very much for sharing your time with us. If we can help with any of your journeys, please don't hesitate to reach out to us anytime. The simple reality is, I was saying this before COVID came along, and that is we're all in it together. Just as what makes the crook so successful is they actually converge, collaborate, and support each other. And I think we as a community of practitioners, no matter where we're from, what I have found with these people in this space is they are so willing to give up their time to support others. And I think if the more effort we can put in it and make that collaboration even greater, then the more effective we can be by learning from our stories. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe. I hope you've enjoyed these series of 4 webinars we've done this month during International Cybersecurity Awareness Week or month. And we look forward to the next one. So thank you and have a brilliant day. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Brian.